the podcast to be named later here on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. He is Jarrod Prugar. I am Alex Stumpf. Jarrod, how's it going, man?
It's great. It's Thanksgiving this week. Pirates, of course, got into some things on Thanksgiving Eve and even earlier in the week because what's a holiday without Pirates transactions?
You know what? Yeah, it's almost amazing that news didn't break, a couple hours later. But yes, a couple bits of news from this past week. A couple one-year signings. Yoshi Tsutsugo is coming back to the Pirates. This was probably the most predictable move. It just made so much sense for both sides. Yoshi was looking for a one-year prove-it deal. He got it. It's a one-year, $4 million contract. Still needs to pass the physical and all that good stuff, so it hasn't been officially announced yet, but that has happened. The other one was a little more off the wall, but it kind of makes sense. The Jose Quintana signing for a one-year, $2 million contract hasn't been explicitly said if he is going to be a starter, if he is going to be a reliever. Have to imagine if he's signing this early for such a modest amount, he's at least been given a word that he'll be, able to compete for a starting position. And looking at the rotation, it seems like there would be one. Jarrod, I want to throw it to you here before we dive into far in. Which player is going to have the bigger impact on the 2022 Pirates, Jose Quintana or Yoshi Tsutsugo?
Well, that's tough because I think Tsutsugo is an everyday player. Obviously, you would think that he would have the most impact on the roster, on the lineup every day that he's in there. But to me, I think it's Quintana because the biggest thing for me is the intangibles, right? He's a lefty, he's a veteran, and I think that's exactly what this bullpen needs. He's a veteran that's not just solely been in the Pirates organization. He's a veteran that's been all over the place, especially of late. So he's been in a couple different organizations. He's had sustained success for the most part, but this is a guy that I think really, really the guys can pick his brain and really just kind of lean on that leadership, which is something that the Pirates staff really, really needs.
Yeah, they do need someone like that. And I like how we could kind of view him as a reliever also right now, because at some point Contreras is going to come up and he's going to need a rotation spot. And, maybe someone struggles or someone gets hurt and, that's resolved that way. But Yahuré is also going to need a spot at some point. Max Kranik's also going to need a spot at some point. I get why you need starter depth. I get why you need it, especially early in a season. So that all makes sense. Quintana could slide into the bullpen later in the year. That's good. It gives them some options right now. This is kind of, I don't think it's quite a Tyler Anderson signing, but there's definitely some Tyler Anderson inspiration behind here. And as I wrote for the Mound Visit, bad year. He did not have a good year last year. As you would expect from someone who signs a one-year, $2 million contract with a last-place team in November. He did not have a good year. There are some things you can latch onto: the whiff rate, the strikeout rate, the fact that he was getting chases out of the zone, like all that's some good stuff. I don't know if there is a quick way to fix him. I don't know if it's you just have to sit or stand back on the first base side of the rubber, even though you're standing on third base side or more center cut for more 2021. Maybe you change grips again. Maybe you do a lot of different things. As a guy you just throw up against the wall, it makes sense. I don't blame anyone if they would have rather hung on to a prospect or something, but there was always going to be a couple signings like this, so they can't all those roster spots can't go to prospects. We went further in depth with that last week. So it's Jose Quintana's not going to set the world on fire. I think he'll be fine for what he is. Yoshi is the boomer bust guy for me. I still have some reservations. I've written about his struggle with the fastball. We all know how he is as a fielder. The Pirates view him as a first baseman primarily. I wonder if that's going to end up being just more of a DH, depending on what the future of Colin Moran and Mason Martin are. He's on a prove-it deal. The dude has confidence in himself. Like, of all the things you could say about Yoshi, or I could say, I'm worried about this. I feel like there's concern about this. He believes in himself. That's why he went into this offseason specifically looking for a one-year deal. The Pirates can guarantee him playing time. The Pirates can, guarantee him a chance to play for a contender at the end of the year if he's succeeding. Of course, he would end up being traded at the deadline. it just made too much sense for him to not go anywhere else, and which is why this entire time Pirates just it's good that they got it done before the inevitable lockout. It was not at all surprising. The Pirates were always the front runner. They were always the favorite to bring him back.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an all but a formality, getting him signed, and I'm glad that they did too. And I mean, and $1 year, $4 million is very, it's a very inexpensive deal for a guy that could really provide some value to the lineup and in the field. And it does kind of put in that question: what do they do with Colin Moran? And Mason Martin? I mean, I think obviously it's clear that Mason Martin, if he's not selected in the Rule 5 draft, and I really don't think that he will be, to be perfectly honest, he's going to start in AAA and see where he's at and see what happens. And if there is a DH or when there is a DH, then hey, you have some options. But I am very curious to see what this means for Colin Moran moving forward, as well. But you know what? They're low risk, high reward signings. And hey, let's see what happens. This is, I think, another bridge year to 2023. So this is, hey, see what these guys can do and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would call them high reward. I think it's medium reward for both at best, but it's definitely low risk for both. The focus is definitely on the young kids in the system that'll start to come up on 2023. And as for Colin Moran, yeah, I don't want to date this podcast too much. I wouldn't be shocked if he's non-tendered, next week. It's one of those, just looking at everything, he's in an iffy spot at the moment. And honestly, if they would have put Mason Martin on the 40-man roster, I think Colin Moran would be gone next week. No questions asked, with Yoshi in the bank. But that's not the case. I think the Oakland Athletics are the type of team that would roll the dice on Mason Martin, because they are trading away Matt Olson inevitably this offseason. They have roster spots to give. They could just throw him at that first base DH spot, see what happens. I don't think it's a given that he's going to get through. I know not a lot of first basemen get selected and drafted, and even if he does, there's a chance he could come back to the Pirates organization after that. There's a lot of stuff like that, but I not one of those guys who's just he's just going to be able to pass through right now. I think there's a very legitimate chance the Pirates are losing their only first base prospect of note at the moment. And first base, just in general, is very thin, because you have Colin Moran, who is coming off of a 0.0 WAR season. You've got Yoshi Tsutsugo, who had 6 or 7 really good weeks with the Pirates, but was designated for assignment twice. And now you have Mason Martin, who could go Rule 5. That position is just full of question marks and holes, and that's not particularly good to see at this point of the rebuild, because like you said, 2023 is whenever this team should start showing teeth, whenever they should have a lot of these guys up in the major leagues, whenever they should start, punching back a little bit. Who plays first base? Because of 2023, if Mason Martin's gone, there's basically no one.
Yeah. That could be, and that's a position where you need to be strong at, if you want to be any good.
Yeah.
So
you need some thump. You need some offense from that position.
Right. And they didn't really get that from Colin Moran for the most part last season. And they really haven't, Josh Bell had that really, really good first half a couple of years ago, but they haven't maximized first base. And that's a position that needs to be a strength. That's a position that needs to matter. But, maybe that's the role Tsutsugo could go. But, it's kind of like Pedro Serrano, although the opposite. He has trouble with the fastball, not necessarily the off-speed pitch.
When was the last time the Pirates got great first base play outside of that, first half of the season from Josh Bell? I'm lowering the bar to even just good. Well,
it wasn't Pedro Alvarez.
It wasn't Pedro Alvarez. Could we qualify Garrett Jones as that? If it's not Garrett Jones, are we going all the way back to a Matt Stairs or Kevin Young at that point? This position has been barren for the Pirates, full of platoons, full of just wandering people, veterans, and just not a good position going on. And I'm not saying Mason Martin is this superstar prospect or a sure bet,
but he is a prospect.
But he is a prospect, and I think he was zeroing in on some things that get better at baseball camp. that were I was legitimately surprised the way they talked about him down there that he wasn't ended up selected.
Yeah, I mean,
legitimately surprised.
As somebody that got to see him play throughout the majority of the season, he kind of fell off towards the end of the year, and I think that's kind of normal and what was expected, given the fact that this is a full-time or full season. Last year, you can simulate all you want, but it just does not amount to the real thing. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see how the next few weeks and really how the Rule 5 draft kind of happens, because I'm very interested to see if somebody does take a flyer on a guy that could hit 30 home runs, but is going to strike out 100 and some odd times.
In this day and age, you could find a way to use that guy. You can.
Exactly. And the Pirates are, leaving him vulnerable. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But we're going to talk about some other power hitters when we come back in the second segment here on the Pirates podcast, to be named later, on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. Pirates podcast, we name later on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network. I am Jarrod Prugar. He is Alex Stumpf. Alex, the moment we've all been waiting for this offseason, the Hall of Fame ballot was released earlier this week, and man, is it fun to talk about that.
No, this is going to be a miserable, joyless year. There are no winners this year. There are only losers. We all lose. This is the worst. This is what 10 years of shaking your fist at the sky about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. This is what it has. This is what you reap and sow. This is it. This is it. And we're restarting the cycle again with an Alex Rodriguez and a David Ortiz. And this is just going to be the most joyless, absolutely no good could possibly come from it ballot, I think, maybe in baseball history.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting ballot for kids, especially people our age, right? Because these are all guys that we saw grow up and that we've played, or that not that we've played, but we've watched play. We watched their careers unfold really from the beginning. I mean, Bonds is on there, Mark Burley's on there, Pittsburgh's Lord and Savior AJ Burnett is on there.
No, he isn't.
Yes, he is. Oh, I'm sorry. It's 2021. But, you have guys like Torrey Hunter, Jeff Kent, Andy Pettitte. There are a lot of good names, but there are a lot of, interesting names for the wrong reasons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's absolutely the only argument against Bonds and Clemens is that they use steroids, and it's like everyone they did it at a time. Like,
let's be perfectly honest, right? Steroids saved baseball. 1998 saved in the home run chase.
We can't pretend. We can't pretend that without steroids, that without them turning a blind eye, this is a problem that Major League Baseball itself created. God. And now 20 something years later, we have to play the moral authority over it. Like, come on, like let's not pretend kid ourselves.
I mean, in the 70s and 80s, it was amphetamines. So it's pick your poison. Which would you rather worse?
Greenies. Almost everyone took greenies. Yeah.
Right. Do you want greenies uppers or do you want steroids? Because those guys they made it to the Hall of Fame, but these guys that helped save the game of baseball, that coming out of a strike, they saved the game of baseball with 1998. And listen, I remember being a kid. I was 8 years old at the time, or 7 years old, listening to Mark McGwire's, record-setting home run at the time on the radio. It just kind of captivated an entire nation, and really made baseball, something to fall back in love with. And then, then the moral authority came apart and came of age in the early 2000s, and Barry Bonds, say what you want. Steroids do not help you hit a baseball. They help you recover. They help you add strength. They do not help you hit a baseball or help you hit a curveball. And you can even look at Barry Bonds and really two different careers, right? pre-San Francisco Giants, pre-steroids, Barry Bonds, and then post. And you still, to me, I still think he's a Hall of Famer.
I do too. Do too.
And Roger Clemens, Roger Clemens was a stud. He threw a sharp object at Mike Piazza. Hall of Famer.
I mean, part of the reason why this draft is just so horrible also is because so many of the Omar Vizquels of this draft, like Roger Clemens, what he is accused of doing, what Omar Vizquel is accused of doing.
Terribly different things, yes.
Yeah, like, I mean, off the field for Roger Clemens, I'm not even talking steroids there. I'll keep the podcast G, but if you Google some stuff, it's bad. It's horrific. It's Omar Vizquel. My God, that was just absolutely terrible. The news that we have seen come out over the last couple months, like, we there is a lot of horrible acts done to people, to minors, acts of bigotry that are on this ballot. Just
I mean,
it's a very ugly ballot. There's just nothing good about this ballot. I root for Scott Rowland, who is a saint compared to so many of these other people who could potentially be one day.
That's what's tough, right? Because how much do you value the ball player over the character, over the person? Because obviously these guys are on here as ball players for reasons, right? But as human beings, there is a moral high ground, there is a moral authority, and I mean, you look at some of these guys. If they were up against anybody else, would there be even a choice at this? So I'm very interested to see how this plays out, because this is going to be the most interesting, I think, election process of all time. Don't get me wrong, there are flawed individuals that are in the Hall of Fame, and and then that's going back to the Hall of Fame's inception, right? There's some pretty not good people.
Oh yeah, there are.
To put it lightly.
There are. Like, we're not going to pretend that Ty Cobb was a good dude or Steve Carlton was a good dude. Like, there were some legitimately bad people in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Yeah. And I get the argument for, well, that doesn't excuse why you could add another one into it. I'm personally, if we're talking about ideal, it is the Baseball Hall of Fame. I would view someone's contributions on the baseball field as the only barometer for said Hall of Fame. But since we have really opened up this can of worms, there are people that on this ballot that are, as baseball players, absolutely worth it, but not. And I guess I should say, because it always comes back, oh, you don't agree with like a Curt Schilling's politics. It's like, no, I don't agree with bigotry. That's not politics. That's not a political stance right there. It's, as a baseball player, there is absolutely no question Curt Schilling's a Hall of Famer. And you know what the wonderful thing is, Jarrod, is we've had this horrible, horrible, horrible debate for as long as we possibly can. 10 years. Why did we do this to ourselves? If we would have just ripped off the Band-Aid in 2012, we would have been done with this. Instead, we get to talk about it every freaking year. I am tired of talking about so much of this stuff. Nothing would make me happier than to not have to talk about Barry Bonds every damn year.
Yeah. And, baseball accolades, Barry Bonds should be in my opinion. We've talked about that before, right? I mean, and this is the last year on his. Think about this: the Baseball Hall of Fame. I understand what Pete Rose did, but only in baseball could you have the best hitter, the hit king, and the home run king nowhere near the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
That is absurd to me. Now I understand Pete Rose banned from baseball, banned from the Hall of Fame, banned from baseball, whatever. I get that, but like the two of the premier spots, the hit king and the home run king, not in the Hall of Fame, I think to me is a travesty.
I would advocate Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame after he's dead. Like, he made his deal to avoid prison time, and that's why he's not in the Hall of Fame, and he shouldn't be able to, get off scot-free about that. But you can't tell the story of baseball history without Pete Rose. So after he passes, I put him in.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy that deserves to be there. I mean, just looking at this ballot, right? It's 2022. Bonds, Clemens, Sammy Sosa, and Curt Schilling are all in their final year on the ballot. I think, if anything, Sammy Sosa is probably the least likely to be in the Hall of Fame out of those three. And he's probably the least flawed as far as his character goes.
No, yeah, he just took steroids. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, he's changed colors, but I mean, that's a genetic
thing. That was a skid issue he had.
Right. But I mean, it's tough. And then you look at first year candidates, you got Carl Crawford, Prince Fielder, Ryan Howard, Tim Lincecum, Justin Morneau, Joe Nathan, Jonathan Papelbon, Jake Peavy, AJ Pierzynski, A-Rod, Jimmy Rollins, Mark Teixeira, Billy Wagner.
Billy Wagner's on the list.
Yeah, he is on the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, Billy Wagner to me is a no-brainer. He was one of the best closers of all time, and he did so in the shadow of Mariano Rivera. Tim Lincecum is, I think, this generation's Terrell Davis.
That's a comp.
Yeah, I mean, he was Jim. Right. He was on top of his game for about 5 minutes, and he was a stud during the season and the postseason, won championships, and then that was that. And then he was gone. Poof. Kind of like Terrell Davis. Retired at the top of the game. Now, I don't think Tim Lincecum retired at the top of his game. But, Mark Burley, Bobby Abreu, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. Todd Helton, though, I do think he would be. And Torrey Hunter, I think, also, who's on the list. And Andy Pettitte. You want to talk about guys in steroids. Andy Pettitte took steroids, admitted to taking steroids, and I feel like people kind of forget that he took steroids.
Yeah.
He did it the right way. He came out, admitted he was flawed. Hey, I'm sorry, I did it. And think about that. That's all Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens had to do. Hey, we did it. Hey, okay. All right, you admitted it.
Yeah.
We're not all perfect.
I don't know. It's going to be bizarre 10 years from now whenever David Ortiz, who is accused of the exact same things, only thing they have David Ortiz and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens on is biogenesis. And David Ortiz, 7 or 8 years from now, is going to limp into the Hall of Fame. A-Rod's going to limp into the Hall of Fame. And Barry Bonds isn't going to be in there. And people are going to go, why? Well, because of a really stupid reason, actually.
Yeah. And this is I don't think that this is a very strong class either.
Except for the fact that there's like the best baseball the best baseball player not named Babe Ruth of all time on there. Guy with 7 Cy Youngs.
And the worst part is we're sitting here knowing that he's probably not going to get elected.
Yeah. This isn't going to be a strong Hall of Fame class. There is a very legitimate chance that Curt Schilling is the only guy elected into the Hall of Fame. And he's the only one that I'm kind of looking at as actually getting 75%.
Yeah.
Right. Because I like Scott Rowland. I really like Billy Wagner. I think both of them take steps. I think Rowland will get in Edgar Martinez style at the end, but they're not going to be close this year.
How many are you allowed to vote for?
10.
All right. So who are your 10?
All right. I'm just going to look at the list right now. Bonds, Clemens, Helton, Ortiz, A-Rod, Rowland. So I'm not a hypocrite, and I am going solely based off of baseball qualifications. Schilling, Wagner. I don't need to do all 10. I'm good with 8.
All right. I'm jotting mine down now.
Okay.
I thought you were taking those extra 2.
No, I'm not. I don't need Sosa in there. Don't need Manny Ramirez in there. Maybe Manny. Nah, I'm not feeling Manny.
You got to play 2 ways, man. His defense was never good.
Yeah.
So I got Bonds, Clemens, Todd Helton, the real OG. I got Ryan Howard just because I think he was just so good for Philly.
He was fun to watch.
And let's think back to the time where the Pirates could have had him, but they thought that they had the next coming of Ryan Howard and Brad Eldred. And we see how that worked out for all parties involved. I also like Wagner. Listen, Billy Wagner was so much fun to watch, and he was the best closer in the game outside of Mariano Rivera. And I mean, those two both revolutionized the closer position. So yeah, I mean, 100%. Those two. I like Torrey Hunter too. I think the way that he played the game, both on both sides, both defensively and offensively, were really good. I got to go with I don't like Kurt Schilling, and it's not just because of what he's done off the field. I grew up a Yankees fan, so he's the reason why I hate Sox. I hate blood, everything. But I got to give credit where it's due for what he did with the Diamondbacks, and everywhere he but Boston. So him, and then I like A-Rod, and I really want to see Andy Pettitte get in, because if we're gonna go character, he did it the right way, and the stats in the postseason back that up.
All right, we're going to talk more about this Hall of Fame as it comes along, as we near, because we're going to need some good lockout content as we near. We'll dive in more in depth and give some passionate cases for why maybe some certain players here deserve Hall of Fame consideration later in the cycle. I think we covered our bases here early on now. We're going to take one more break. We got a little more show to come back to. Welcome back to the podcast to be named later. Jarrod, lockout's going to start by the time we do our next podcast. How are you going to spend your Major League Baseball work stoppage?
Well, that's a good question, Alex. How are you going to spend it?
I am going to spend it banging my head up against the wall, wondering who could have seen this coming from 2017 and how it could have possibly been avoided.
Okay, so you and I are planning on hunkering down and really bunkering up here for the lockout just because we have nothing else better to do. But let's talk. What would you want to see in the new CBA?
What I would like to see in the new CBA is no games missed, and everything starts on time. That's selfishly my number one priority out of all of this is like, don't miss time. That's the one thing baseball has going for it right now. Like, as bad as 2020 was and how they ended up botching so much of that, don't miss games in 2022 because of it. Don't play another shortened season, especially one that is 100% in your control. Just play the season the right way. As for like when free agency starts, if it's 29.5, if arbitration is going to be based on war, if there's going to be a giant pool, if there's going to be an international draft, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. I get it all. That's fine. No, just number one priority, don't miss the season. Don't miss any season or spring training.
Yeah, I don't think baseball's in a position where it can afford to do that. They have to play games. They have to get the season started on time. I mean, they're not. To me, baseball is not doing a great job of marketing it. I mean, years ago they put all those protective nettings down because people weren't paying attention behind the dugout. Baseball's done a terrible job, I think, of marketing the game. Rob Manfred even said that they don't really market it the way and that's just by design. I mean, to me, baseball is the best game. I mean, it's so much like life. You're faced with adversity every pitch, whether it's gonna be a curveball, fastball, whatever. You swing or miss, you get the next one. You strike out, you go get them in the field. You pitch, you give up a bomb into the river, and you come back and you give up another bomb. But I mean, to me, baseball can't afford a work stoppage. They just can't. Football lucked out, I think. The way that they do, the way that things happen. And you saw what happened with hockey when they had their lockout. Baseball can't afford to lose games. They just can't. The shortened season in 2020, last season, I thought they did a good job. But they just can't afford it. And to me, what I want to see, obviously no games missed. They have to be better at marketing the game and building the brand of baseball, because it is America's pastime, but too many times, and this is kind of a social issue. We go out, and how many times at games are people looking at their phones, right? I mean, that's just kind of the way that it is. It's a shame, but that's kind of the nature of every game now. Everything is held up by their phones. So just go out and enjoy the game. And we say that as we type on our computers throughout every game. But, it's just one of those situations. But my thing is, make baseball fun again. Embrace the home run trots, embrace the bat flips, because if I ever hit a ball into the Allegheny on a fly, even from 5 feet away from the river, I would be absolutely going bonkers. So I get it, man, and celebrate that. The Padres are fun to watch until they collapse, once Adam Frazier got there. But the Vlad Juniors and the Fernando Tatis Juniors of the world, let them have fun, let them play the game, and let there be emotion. The Ronald Acuñas of the world, that emotion is good, to an extent, and passion for the game is good. Help it reach the next generation. And I think if they allow players to do that and embrace that, I think baseball will be better because of it. I mean, think about it. The LA Angels, I understand Trout's been hurt quite a bit recently. They have the most intriguing player and probably the best player, his first one's two-way, in quite some time, in Shohei Ohtani, and then our generation's best outfielder of all time, and Mike Trout. And they play in LA, and I feel like on the East Coast we hear nothing about them because of their schedule or injuries or what have you. Embrace it, man. Market that. Like, I would love to be able to watch Shohei Ohtani on a regular basis. I get it. I'd have to stay up late to watch it, but man, watching him pitch and watching him hit in the same game as an AL player, that to me is baseball. That to me is fun.
I'd also like just Trout to be healthy and put in a whole season.
Yes, that too. That is also important.
You know what you could do, listeners at home? Through Major League Baseball's lockout, you can listen to all the other fine podcasts that we have here on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcasting Network, wherever you find podcasts, wherever your preferred choice is, whether it's Stitcher or iTunes. I'm hearing that Enron's coming back with a podcasting form that you could get some, you get your shows through.
Well, and listen, if we're going to sit through a lockout, we're also going to need content ideas. So feel free to come up with ideas. You can send them to Alex and I on Twitter. But we thank you, as always, for listening to the Pirates podcast to be named later on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. For Alex Stumpf, this has been Jarrod Prugar. We will catch you next week, hopefully only locked out of our houses, not locked out of a Major League Baseball.